This is a republic, if you can keep it, with Mark Brewer and Jeff Timmer.
I'm Mark Brewer. Welcome, to borrow a phrase from Peaches and Herb, the Re-indicted and It Feels So Good episode of A Republic If You Can Keep It. The Trump retribution parade continues as his Department of Payback, formerly known as the Department of Justice, indicts James Comey for posting a picture of seashells on social media. If that doesn't work, they could try claiming that the 6'8" Comey's height poses an imminent threat to the safety of the president.
I'm Jeff Timmer. Try saying Comey sells seashells by the seashore 5 times real fast. New polling from the Detroit Chamber shows undecided remains the leader in the Michigan Democrats' battle for the U.S. Senate nomination. Among Republicans, John James continues to lead Perry Johnson. Mike Cox and the rest of the field trail far behind. The one no contest race, Jocelyn Benson has a 58-point lead in the race for the Democratic gubernatorial nomination.
The United States Supreme Court has effectively repealed the last remnants of the Voting Rights Act, setting the stage for a possible new round of partisan gerrymanders across the country. It comes as the last 4 Black Republicans in Congress retire, leaving the Republicans with the prospect of no Black House members come 2027.
The impact goes beyond the U.S. House of Representatives. In Michigan, this decision effectively eliminates majority-minority as a criterion for the Michigan Citizens Independent Redistricting Commission when it draws future state legislative district maps. And that will quite possibly happen before the 2028 elections.
The Trump narcissism parade continues to grow. The latest, his snarling mug will now appear on commemorative U.S. passports, although Trump-free passports will continue to be available. I'm glad I got mine renewed a few years ago. And King Charles presented Trump with the ship's bell from the World War II submarine HMS Trump. One ominous sign, that ship was sold off and broken up for scrap in August of 1971.
Despite the war of words from the Republicans over election integrity these past few years, Secretary of State Jocelyn Benson continues to do the job she's supposed to do, the way she's supposed to do it, following all state and federal laws. In doing that, she has announced that 2.1 million outdated voter registrations have been canceled since 2019 or are in the process of being canceled. For the first time ever, this includes over 180,000 dormant registrations of people who haven't voted in a single election in the last 20 years or longer.
I have some really important news about our work to ensure our state voter rolls are accurate and up to date. Many people who are registered choose not to vote, sometimes for several election cycles. And every election, a few thousand of these inactive voters do show up to vote for the first time in years. But others have moved away or passed away, and despite our repeated attempts to change Michigan law, we just didn't have the legal tools to cancel those dormant, inactive records. So with this new rule, now we do. Since 2019, we've identified over 2.1 million inactive registrations that are eligible for cancellation. We've already canceled 1.5 million outdated registrations in the last 6 years, and with the additions from this new rule, there are now nearly 600,000 slated for cancellation in 2027 and 2029. That's 500,000 more cancellations than previous Michigan secretaries of state.
Control of the Michigan State Senate will be decided Tuesday when voters in Michigan's 35th Senate District will decide whether Democrat Shedrick Green or Republican Jason Tunney will represent them for the rest of this year in Lansing. The district includes Bay, Midland, and Saginaw counties, and the Democrats are heavily favored to win on Tuesday and maintain their control of the state Senate.
Jeff, and I'm sorry to tell you that the quote of the week this week has to go to the Bulwark's Tim Miller, that we are in the Fat Elvis era of the Trump presidency.
Well, Tim is always a good quote and a good guest and a good friend, so I'm glad that gets quote of the week. But before we get into talking a little bit more about the goings on this week, Mark. A note on the passing of longtime Senator and Congressman Don Regal, first elected to the U.S. House from Flint in 1966, a wave Republican year, and he was elected as a Republican. He served 5 terms in the U.S. House and then 3 terms in the Senate, where he switched parties and succeeded the legendary Phil Hart. He was one of the few people ever elected to Congress from both parties, switching, as I said, from Republican to Democrat in protest of the Vietnam War and the corruption of the Nixon administration in the aftermath of Watergate. Mark, Regal was wrapping up his 28 years in public office as you were starting as the Michigan Democratic Party chair. Your thoughts?
Well, I did get to know him even before I was party chair. And, many great legislative accomplishments. He was a great partner with Carl Levin for many of those years. They were really a dynamic twosome in the U.S. Senate. But one of my best memories of Regal was that he was a hell of a speaker. He would light up a room and give a populist, rip-roaring Democratic speech at the drop of a hat and get the crowd on its feet and fired up. I've rarely seen fewer that are better at giving a good stump speech than Don Regal.
Well, we also lost a friend of this podcast, former Detroit News reporter and later Department of Justice lawyer Jim Mitzelfelt. Jim and his reporting partner, Eric Friedman, won a Pulitzer Prize for their uncovering of a $1 million corruption scandal in the State House Fiscal Agency. Jim died of melanoma a day short of his 65th birthday. Mark, let's talk a little bit about this U.S. Supreme Court ruling this week that struck down and effectively has gutted Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act. First, maybe just provide our listeners a refresher as to exactly what Section 2 did, and then we can kind of dissect the impact that this will have.
Well, Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act, and applied to the redemption context and voting context, basically said that minorities, particularly African Americans, have to have a meaningful opportunity to elect a candidate of their choice. Doesn't mean it was an African American candidate, but of their choice. And the way the United States Supreme Court had interpreted that was what we came to call the Jingles test, Jeff, which I'm sure you're familiar with from your redistricting work, was that if there was a minority group of sufficient population size in a geographically compact area that voted cohesively, and that the majority voted cohesively against them, and I'm very loosely paraphrasing the legal requirements here, then a district had to be drawn where that minority group had the opportunity, no guarantee, the opportunity to elect a candidate of its own choice, usually of their own race, but not necessarily so. And that really had a remarkable effect on American politics at the federal level, state legislative level, down to the local level. And, brought us out of really the dark era of Jim Crow and the complete lack of African-American representation at all levels of government, particularly in the South. But it also had a big impact here in Michigan. And even though Justice Alito, the author of this opinion, said, well, I'm not overturning or saying the Voting Rights Act is unconstitutional, he effectively gutted it. Jingles is gone. And basically where we are now is, well, if you can randomly draw a map that happens to give a minority population a district in which they are the majority, that's okay. But you cannot do anything constructive or affirmative to make that happen, which is what we had been doing for the last several decades and resulted in this remarkable racial progress. So, again, despite what Alito said, it's a complete gutting of Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act and could have some very severe consequences in terms of minority representation at all levels of government.
The immediate reaction is, one, that this is a travesty, that it's a setback in racial relations and progress that we've made with regard to civil rights. And then the prevailing thought is that, wow, this is a benefit for the Republicans. And it might be, but I'm not completely convinced of that. And when I just look at things here in Michigan, either the congressional map or the maps for the state house and state senate that were produced by this independent redistricting commission this decade for the first time since the constitutional change here in the state back after the 2018 election, I certainly do not think that this ruling, had it been in effect when the maps were drawn in 2021 and then amended for the 2024 election, some of the districts were amended as a result of a lawsuit. I don't think it would benefit the Republicans here. It would actually, I think, benefit the Democrats if a redraw were to happen in the legislative maps, either of the chambers or the U.S. House map. I haven't looked and studied enough of certainly the congressional races. I think we know how for example, what Louisiana would do. They will go in and not only just try to eliminate the second majority minority district that they were ordered to draw last year, but they're probably going to look at eliminating the first and having 0 majority minority districts. But I think in a year like this, just like as in Texas, which earlier started this mid-decade redistricting war that we've seen from state to state across the country, where Republicans dominate or Democrats dominate. In the war was started by Trump and Greg Abbott and the Republicans in Texas trying to gain an advantage, put their thumb on the scale in a year they would expected to have a disadvantage. And we've seen how that's played out. And all else being equal, the Texas map would yield more Republican seats. This ain't an equal year. This is a year, in a wave year, maps that they drew where they lessen Republican margins in some districts to increase them in others is going to end up biting them in the ass in a big way this November. In Texas and in Florida, and I think even possibly in places like Louisiana, if they try to get too greedy now as a result of this ruling by the Supreme Court, they're going to do that. They're going to reduce Republican, they're going to take majority minority districts that exist in their current maps, take Democrats from those, crack them into different districts, meaning they're adding them into Republican districts, cutting the Republican margins in what are now safe Republican seats, and they're going to tilt less safe Republican seats, maybe, certainly lean Republican seats, or in some cases, toss-ups would result in this, especially in a wave year. It's going to be the kind of thing where be careful what you ask for, you just might get it. And I think that anybody who's looking at this saying that this is going to, for certain, benefit the Republicans, I don't think that's going to be the case. I think that the jury is definitely out on that. And over the long haul, it is going to be very problematic for civil rights and race relations, because every election isn't going to be a wave election one way or the other. And this, while it's not a good day for democracy, for voting rights, for equality before the law, for one man, one vote, none of that was benefited by this. It was all hurt by the Supreme Court decision. But I don't know that the immediate political fallout is going to benefit the Republicans and not benefit the Democrats. That's at least my first reaction. And I expect that we're going to see lawsuits here in Michigan in federal court challenging the U.S. House plan, the state Senate plan, and the state House plan. And it would certainly be possible that a federal court could order Michigan to redraw their plans. It will be out of partisan hands, regardless of whether or not the Democrats control the trifecta in Lansing, or it will be out of the politicians' hands. It will be up to the commissioners, independent commissioners, and by changing this criteria that is part of the Michigan Constitution now, the Federal Voting Rights Act, not having to adhere to that in the way that was done when the amendment was written, I think is going to have the political ramification of a net benefit to Democrats, not Republicans.
There's lots to unravel here, and I want to be very clear as we're starting this discussion. This was a terrible decision. I think it's wrong. It defies the 13th through 15th Amendments. It defies the will of Congress and what they said very explicitly in the Voting Rights Act. It really is the culmination of a project that Alito and Chief Justice Roberts have been working on for years to undo the Voting Rights Act. And the majority in that court, it just blinks at reality. They somehow seem to think that race discrimination is no longer a problem in this country when it is, and we need the Voting Rights Act more than ever. That being said, one of the other bad aspects of the case was they actually said some positive things about gerrymandering, Jeff. So we've gone, now like, well, in Rucho, they said, well, it's a bad thing, gerrymandering, but the federal courts can't do anything about it. In this case, they now said, well, you can partisan gerrymander, no matter its effect on African Americans. So they actually kind of put a stamp of approval on that. All that being said, I think this is going to could play out in different ways in different states and different localities. You talked about cracking African American populations. Well, in some places, it may do the Republicans good to pack African Americans, which would have the effect of preserving an African American district, unfairly so, because it'll be packed with African Americans who should be dispersed among other districts. I think you're going to see other impacts in other places. And frankly, I think this could really ignite interest in like state voting right acts, which a number of us were pushing during the Democratic trifecta. I think this really could create a backlash and kind of a new civil rights movement. I've also seen in the last 24 hours this really expand interest in reforming the Supreme Court. I mean, this court is just so out of touch and so on a mission to, bleach the governments of this country, literally, make them more white. That it's gotten to the point where it's intolerable for a lot of folks. Here in Michigan, I suppose you're right. There could be a lawsuit to try to change the congressional or legislative districts, but there's some things built into the Voters Not Politicians Amendment of 2018 that kind of restrain that. I think you're right. Maybe the Voting Rights Act aspect of that goes away, superseded by this decision. But that amendment also was very clear that you cannot engage in partisan gerrymandering. So despite what the Supreme Court said, kind of approvingly of that, there's that built-in restraint in the Michigan Constitution that yesterday's decision did not override. And so if they attempt to change the districts, they're still going to have to be attention to that. And there are also other constraints. There's a very strong requirement that communities of interest be kept intact. That, I think, will be a restraint on the abuse of this decision yesterday here in Michigan. So I think we're just going to have to see how this plays out. Different states are in different spots. Some states have already held their primaries. Can they possibly change districts this year? Here in Michigan, we are in the primary period. Filing deadline was a week ago. It would be extremely difficult to do anything at this point, but perhaps for 2028. So we'll just have to play this out. But I do think there is going to be a very strong backlash, not just among the minority communities. And in Michigan, it's been African American, but elsewhere in the country, it's been Hispanics and others who, if they see their political power diminished by this, are going to find new ways to express that power. If and when Democrats come back into power in the Congress or the state legislature here in Michigan, I think you're going to see renewed pushes, like I said, with the state VRA or other kind of things. So it's a terrible decision. I think the short-term impacts are going to be bad, but I think Alito and Roberts need to be very careful about what they asked for and now have delivered. It could create something they didn't want.
With first the mid-decade redistricting wars, that we've mentioned and we've talked about on many, many episodes over the last year. With that, coupled with this decision and the attention that has been focused on redistricting and gerrymandering in particular as a result of this, it's become a much more familiar issue with a wider swath of voters, and they don't like it. And this could, I saw a Substack column this morning about this, that it could have the effect of fueling a call for nationwide uniform federal constitutional change to how districts are drawn, so that one state doesn't have just the one partisan group or another. I'll say, dominate. Illinois dominated by Democrats, California dominated by Democrats, or Texas dominated by Republicans can't skew the results one way or the other. I think we could see that this, I don't know where it would go, but I think there would be some appetite for that, certainly among the public. Now, whether or not it would be among the state legislatures and the U.S. Congress and U.S. House and Senate who would have to decide on an amendment, I don't know. It's going to take some time to build that, but it could be part of an effort to also lift the artificial cap of 435 U.S. House seats, which completely defies the intentions of the founders to have House seats be small. They were supposed to be capped at no more than 30,000 people. That's now we would have an 11,000 plus member U.S. House if we had that small of a populated districts. But the fact that we now have districts that average 750,000 people, and that will go up in the next decade to over 800,000 people, it's the U.S. House and the size of the U.S. House, which was artificially capped back in the early 1900s. It's time to revisit that. We don't, somewhere between 435 and 11,000, we can probably find a sweet spot where we can establish a greater representation of what the intention was, that the U.S. House would be closer to the people they represented, have smaller districts that would be more like a legislative district where you can actually knock on doors and talk to voters and get to know the people in your district that you represent. And so this could be part of a longer term, more sweeping kind of reform that is mandated. Because I think that there's no question voters are fed up with the artifice of the two-party system. We can talk, and we can spend a lot of time talking about why we have a two-party system. That stems from more the winner-take-all nature of the Electoral College. People are fed up with politicians, with both parties, and this is a time where I think we could see a nationwide demand for some kind of reform that's going to change the trajectory of our politics, which has become more corrosive, more polarized, and less acceptable to most Americans. And either it's all going to collapse or there's going to be some changes. We're just not going to sit here continuing to do this and think things are going to get better.
Yeah, no, I think there is stimulus here to change the status quo, Jeff. And I'm a strong believer in the party system, not simply because I was party chair for 18 years, but I think political parties are an integral part of a functioning democracy. Now, can parties go off the rails and become dysfunctional? Yes, and I think that's happening now. But you're not going to get rid of political parties. We need to find a way to make them function properly, be representative. But one thing I did want to mention here, though, is that I think this has struck me the last 24 hours. I've been a big fan of proportional voting for a long time. And actually, if you think about it, that helps solve the problem of gerrymandering because you don't have a winner-take-all district. Suppose you had a legislative district with 3 members, right? That would give a group that has less than 50%, maybe it's a political group, maybe it's an ethnic or a racial group, in that district the opportunity to elect a member of their own, right? And so we don't have to go through what we went through with the Voting Rights Act, where the minority group has to be at least half the population, et cetera, et cetera. So proportional voting may be part of the solution here as well. I think that'll make a legislative body more representative. It'll give smaller groups in those districts the opportunity to elect one of their own. So I think that's something that may get a kind of shot in the arm from yesterday's decision as well, as people now start to think more broadly, as you just have, about fundamental reforms in the way we govern our democracy.
Coming up in just a minute, we will talk with the head of End Citizens United.
More on a republic if you can keep it after these messages.
When most of us think about polling, the focus is on those campaign polls telling us which candidates are winning. But the most important polls are for businesses, local governments, and nonprofits assessing the needs and wants of their customers or constituencies.
Those are polls that guide policies and lead to institutional success. Those polls have to get it right, which makes the choice of a public opinion research firm critical. Epic MRA has been trusted for more than 4 decades to get it right. Our clients have included school boards, statewide nonprofits, corporations, as well as the candidates and news media who rely on us during political campaigns. Whether it's just a couple of questions or a full in-depth survey, we are here and ready to help.
You can reach us at epicmra.com.
Are you looking to stay ahead of the curve on Michigan's public policy landscape? Look no further than Michigan Information and Research Service Incorporated, or MERS. MERS is your go-to source for comprehensive, nonpartisan news and analysis on Michigan's government and public policy. But that's not all. A MERS subscription also gives you access to our powerful legislative monitoring and tracking tools. Stay on top of every bill, amendment, and vote with real-time updates, detailed reports, interactive committee transcripts, legislative analysis tools, and more. Whether you're a policymaker, lobbyist, or just a concerned citizen, MERS keeps you informed with daily updates, exclusive interviews, and detailed reports. Subscribe today and gain access to our extensive archives. Stay informed, stay engaged, and stay ahead with MERS. Visit MERS.news to learn more and subscribe. That's MIRS.news. Don't miss out on the insights that matter most.
Walt Sorg and I talked with Tiffany Muller, president of End Citizens United and the affiliated groups Let America Vote and the End Citizens United / Let America Vote Action Fund. Organizations which are dedicated to reversing what many consider one of the worst rulings of the Supreme Court in the last century, second only to yesterday's, Citizens United, which opened the floodgates for dark money funding of political campaigns. Since joining ECU, Tiffany has helped grow the group from a startup to a nationwide organization with more than 4 million members and 1 million grassroots donors.
Tiffany Muller, it is a pleasure to welcome you to the podcast. Most of our audience probably knows about Citizens United, but for those who are not totally familiar with it, what did that do?
Well, first, thanks so much for having me on today. It's a real pleasure to be here with you. And Citizens United was a Supreme Court decision in January 2010 that was decided by a 5-4 conservative majority vote. And basically what it did is it took 2 really terrible ideas and it merged them together. And it said corporations are people and money equals speech. And it basically opened the floodgates to the kind of unlimited and undisclosed money that we've seen flooding into our elections ever since. And, that decision actually overturned 100 years of precedent that had successfully worked to keep corporate money and kind of these massive independent independent expenditures out of our campaigns. So that is what it did. Now, how it impacts people on a day-to-day basis is it's really taken the power of our democracy out of the hands of the people and put it into the hands of just the wealthiest billionaires and big industries that are trying to buy these elections so that they can then buy the policy outcomes.
As a young lawyer, Tiffany, I was involved in the Austin versus Chamber of Commerce case, which is one of
All
the
right.
cases Citizens United overturned. So it's personal to me. Yeah, this is a very serious problem across the country. We've seen it here in Michigan. Our elections are dominated by dark money spending, particularly the candidate elections. It's just overwhelming. What are some of the solutions that you all are proposing
Yeah.
to help cope with the damage wrought by Citizens United?
What we have seen is this continued chipping away of the guardrails and the campaign finance laws that we have on the books. And we know that we need both a long term strategy to overturn Citizens United, and that includes either passing a constitutional amendment or getting the Supreme Court to overturn itself. Those are both really high bars. And one of the things that that is going to require is we are going to have a movement of people who are demanding this kind of change. And we're really proud we've built an organization of 4 million members across the country, but we really have to have that kind of continued steady pressure from the ground up. Because look, I travel the country all the time doing town halls, and what we know is this is not a Republican issue, a Democratic issue, or an independent issue. Voters out there think there's way too much money in politics. Both sides are corrupt and they want the money out. But in order to do that, we're going to have to build this long term movement and get some things done like Supreme Court reform. But guess what? We could pass some really meaningful legislation tomorrow with a simple vote of Congress if we just had the right people in office to do it. One of the biggest things we need to pass is disclosure and transparency. The Supreme Court said in 2010 that there would be full transparency around the money being spent in our elections. And we know that that has been absolutely false. In 2024 alone, there was $2 billion spent that we actually don't know where it came from. You can't trace it back to the original source. And over the years, we have seen this mean that federal governments have intervened in our elections. We've seen foreign citizens participating in our elections. We see big corporations hiding their investment so you can't even root out the pay to play corruption that is happening. And disclosure and transparency could be passed tomorrow with a simple vote by Congress. We could also do things like actually strengthen and reform the Federal Elections Commission so it was a working body again and a cop on the beat to enforce the laws. We could stop super PAC coordination. We could incentivize actually getting candidates to run on small dollar donors instead of just going after the biggest donors. We could stop gerrymandering. We could protect the right to vote. There's so much we could do with a simple vote of Congress if we have the right people in office.
Yeah, it strikes me that the states can do much of that as well.
Yeah.
I've had a great interest in the Arizona transparency and disclosure regime, which was enacted a few years ago, which I thought was quite good. It went back through and made sure there couldn't be conduits. You had to
Yep.
disclose the original source of the funds. So I think there are things that can be done at the state level as well, parallel to the things you just described.
And the states that we've seen take that step and do that and put in strict disclosure and transparency laws, we have also seen then some of the money come out of the system, right? I remember when Montana passed their disclosure and transparency laws, you actually saw some of the Koch money, the Koch brothers money, come out of those state legislative campaigns because they didn't want to be identified as such a major donor to those efforts.
It seems as though very wealthy people, there's no problem with them being able to promote themselves as candidates and win or lose. We had the DeVos election against Jennifer Granholm many years ago, where he spent $40 million roughly of his own money and lost badly. You saw Mike Bloomberg spend God knows how many millions of his personal fortune and get, I think, one convention vote out of the whole deal. But these same people, if they give their money to somebody else who's more electable, they think they can control elections, and it seems more and more like they can.
Yeah, I mean, that is one of the skyrocketing places where we have seen just money flooding into our system. So before Citizens United, billionaires accounted for, I think it is 0.5% of our election spending or something right around there. Basically, they accounted for very, very little of our election spending right before the Citizens United decision. A New York Times analysis just about, I think it was last month, showed that 300 billionaire families in 2024 accounted for 19% of the election spending in 2024. So one out of every $5 was coming from just 300 families. And those folks are then rewarded And the average amount that they gave was over $10 million. So, and then they're rewarded with these massive tax breaks. We actually just saw the Republicans pass the biggest tax break in US history to benefit the wealthiest 1% and the biggest corporations in our country. That is not by accident. That is a policy choice that is set up to reward the big donors who are trying to buy these races. And we have seen in some of these cases, Montana Senate race is a good example. One billionaire who's part of the BlackRock group, I think, invested $130 million in trying to elect Tim Sheehy to the Montana Senate seat. But only about 8 million of that was actually disclosed through the super PAC. The rest of it was all dark money and or through his private business. So even the folks closest to that campaign had no idea that this billionaire was buying that kind of access and influence. And that's what I think we have to remember is they're not just giving out of the goodness of their heart. They're giving with an expectation of return on investment. And as our system becomes more and more skewed toward these wealthy individuals and billionaires and these big industry groups, it continues to just drown out and leave behind everyday working families.
Tiffany, could you tell us a little bit about your work specifically in Michigan? I know you've been quite
Sure.
active here. Tell our listeners about what you've been doing in Michigan.
Well, we love Michigan. Michigan's so much fun.
We need help. We need help. Thank you.
To be involved in. It really it is just one of my favorite places. And we've worked in Michigan a long time. We were one of the early endorsers for now Senator Alyssa Slotkin, but when she started running her race in 2018, she was actually one of our very first candidates to take the No Corporate PAC pledge and say she was not going to accept any corporate PAC money because she wanted her voters to know that she was working for them. So she was one of our very first endorsements that year. And we've been proud to work in partnership with her on these issues her entire time in Congress. We worked very closely with Jocelyn Benson and Dana Nessel during the 2022 re-election, and in the fight on the federal level to try to pass H.R. 1, which was a comprehensive democracy reform bill. We are proud to have been an early endorser for Secretary Benson in the governor's race this year, and know that she is going to do such an amazing job as the next governor of Michigan. We have also already endorsed just this cycle Matt Mansdom, who's running in Michigan 7, Christina McDonald-Rivet, who's running in Michigan 8, Rashida Tlaib in Michigan 12, of course, and then Garland Gilchrist, who's current lieutenant governor and running for Secretary of State. So Michigan is an amazing state, and you all have some of the best ballot measures of anywhere in the country. We've been proud over the years to help work on the different voting access ballot measures that have passed that have expanded the right to vote in the state of Michigan. And right now there's a great ballot measure that is in signature collection around actually limiting what people like big energy or big insurance, if they want state contracts, they can't donate and contribute to state elected leaders. And it's a way to really break that tie that we've seen where the biggest industries are controlling the capital there in Michigan. Very excited to support that as well.
Well, thanks for all that help. We certainly need it here. We've got a lot of abuses inside our campaign finance system that need to be addressed.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I mean, Michigan's in the crosshairs. I mean, we just saw Senate Leadership Fund say they're going to spend $45 million, and that's their initial investment to try to make sure that they elect Mike Rogers to that Senate seat. So we know that we're going to see a bunch of outside and dark money coming in, pouring into Michigan.
Yeah, and I'm pleased to say it's increasingly become an issue in races. People are being asked to take pledges similar to the one you ask people to take about not taking corporate PAC money, et cetera. So it's there. I mean, a lot of other prominent issues, obviously, with the economy and everything else. But people, I think, are aware of the corrupting influence of all this money, no matter what its source.
Yeah. Well, and I think really the rising prices that people are facing, whether it's energy prices or prescription drug prices or housing prices or grocery prices, is directly connected to the corruption and the money in our system, right? And that actually, when you combine those two issues, it helps voters understand why nothing's being done to help them, right? Like it
Right.
is much easier to understand why we can't lower prescription drug prices when you understand that Big Pharma is spending $300 million every election cycle and blankets Capitol Hill with 1,500 lobbyists on any given day. That helps explain why we're not actually addressing one of the most pressing priorities that people have and that they feel on their pocketbook. Energy prices, right? How
Right.
many times are we seeing these rate hikes just rubber stamped by the same politicians and the same elected leaders who are taking so much money from these energy companies? Or, things like I know there's been a bill in Michigan to try to expand mental health access, and the insurance companies have fought against it because they don't want to have to pay for expanded benefits, right? They're trying to protect their bottom line. So I actually think like the more that we combine those two issues, the more powerful they are.
Yeah, well, you put your finger on three very important issues here too. Utilities costs have been a big, big issue lately, and
Yeah.
people are starting to understand the hundreds of millions of dollars, most of it dark, that our major utilities spend here trying to influence the legislature and protect the status quo, frankly.
That's right. That's exactly right. And they are only concerned about lining their pockets while we see, kind of across the country, we see these energy rate increases, but I know they've been huge there in Michigan. And you see people having to make the impossible choices between are they going to be able to pay their energy bill or are they going to be able to go get the food that they need or the prescription drugs that they need? And in some cases, you're seeing, energy prices that are equal or more to the mortgage payment or the rent that people are paying. It's unsustainable is what it is. Absolutely unsustainable.
Probably the greatest fundraiser in the history of politics is our current president. There are a lot of things he's not good at, but one of them is raising money without openly breaking the law, whether he launders it through one of his family members or through one of his companies or he launders it through a PAC. Is it possible even to rein in this kind of corruption other than voting these types of people out of office, given the fact that he could spend $1 billion on this next campaign?
Yeah. I mean, we have never seen the kind of corruption that we are seeing out of this administration and out of this president in our country's history, right? He actually campaigned, especially in 2016 and in 2024, on cleaning up the corruption and giving power back to the people. And instead, we are seeing him just loot our government to line his own pocket and to line the pockets of his family and friends. And so this has become a pay to play government. And foreign governments understand it, corporations understand it, big donors understand it. If they want something out of this government, they need to show up with their checkbook. And it means that they are using the official government apparatus to do everything from drop investigations or approve pardons, right? Like this is literally bribes for pardons. The ballroom donors, you can trace almost every single company or individual that is given to this ballroom back to an official action that they wanted taken from the federal government. Approving a merger, getting a pardon, dropping an investigation, right? The list goes on and on. And you are seeing these giveaways to these huge industries, all at the expense of the American people. And, he is able to do it because nobody is standing, Congress, the current Republican Congress, is not standing up and stopping him. But there is actually a lot that they could do, again, tomorrow with a simple majority vote. If they just had the backbone to do it, we could actually put in some real anti-corrupt. Some of this stuff is pretty blatantly illegal and already against the kind of pay to play laws that we have on the books. But additionally, there is lots of things that we could pass tomorrow that would make sure that it was written out more clearly that, hey, if you're president, you shouldn't be making money off of some crypto meme scam, right? Or you can't take a plane worth $400 million from a foreign government. these things can be clarified in the law with just a simple vote of Congress. But right now, this Republican majority won't do anything to stand up to
Let's
him.
not forget the
Yeah, and
$2
of
million
course,
motorhome for Clarence Thomas, too.
Please don't forget that. I mean, RVs for all of us, right?
well, and of course, the Department of Justice won't do anything either to enforce the existing laws. I know this may be
Well,
beyond a
it's
little,
been weaponized against,
yeah.
political opponents in a way that we've, again, never seen in our country's history.
Do you think on these issues we should take any encouragement from what just happened to Viktor Orban? I mean, I don't have a number for you,
Yes.
but I suspect there was a lot of money spent trying to sway that election. And notwithstanding that, and all the other type of corruption and autocracy that was going on in that country, the people did rise up and throw him out. That
Yeah.
encouraging
And
for us?
it absolutely is. And the fight against the government corruption was a huge part of bringing together that coalition that finally toppled him, right? And they had this whole campaign, and it was about some of the very same things that we're seeing in our country. Economic prices and just the fact that people couldn't work hard enough to get ahead, and then the absolute looting of their government to favor him and his cronies. And so it was actually a real unifying message that helped bring together these different factions of the coalition in order to help topple him. And that is for a long time been one of the playbooks of taking down an authoritarian regime, is actually bringing together differing parts of the coalition around a kind of anti-corruption message. Because when you have these authoritarian leaders, you always see this rise in corruption at the harm and at the expense of the people. And so I actually do think that there are a lot of lessons we can take from it. And, we need things that give us hope in this moment because we have to keep fighting back. And that should give us a lot of hope.
At the danger of injecting some bipartisanship into this conversation, can you think of other than the late John McCain, who comes to mind immediately as a champion of this cause, are there any Republicans now speaking out against the abuses in both campaign finance and the tangential bribery schemes that are going around?
None that immediately come to mind. However, I will say there are some of these pieces that are bipartisan, and I will take a stock trading ban, right? We need to pass a ban on trading individual stocks, both for members of Congress and the executive branch. But the efforts to take on stock trading in Congress, where we have seen just blatant abuses of insider information for, and it is a thing that cuts across all party lines. It's over 90% supported by the American people. That actually has been bipartisan. And you see a few of those kind of anti-corruption and ethics reform issues where there is some bipartisan support on it. And we have to take advantage of that bipartisan support and get those things done and get that passed.
What can the average person do? Obviously, great attorneys
Well,
like
they
Mark and Dana Nessel and Jocelyn Benson can take them on in court. You can be an advocate at the national level. But what about somebody like me who's just a person?
Well, first of all, it takes all of us being in this fight together. And I always say that courage is contagious, right? You never know when you show up to a town hall, who else maybe was questioning whether or not they should show up. And so you just being there is helping provide them kind of that next ounce of courage they need to keep showing up. So look, first and foremost, we have to vote. Our vote is our power. And we have to make sure that we have a plan to vote and that your friends and family and neighbors and coworkers all are registered and have a plan to vote as well. Next, we need people holding their members and candidates accountable, right? We need to ask questions. We need to show up at town halls. We need to send in letters to their office. We need to send off the emails. We have to keep these issues front and center. Number 3, there are lots of ways to get even more involved, whether it's phone banking or text banking or knocking on doors. You can join great organizations like End Citizens United. Go to endcitizensunited.org. We have volunteers every single day that are doing postcard campaigns or phone banking campaigns or text banking campaigns to keep these issues front and center. So those are some of the things that you can do. And Look, it is going to not change overnight. There is no one silver bullet, but I believe in this country's capacity to change. We have seen it so many times before, and I believe that once again we are on the side of right, and that we will see change around these issues if we all just continue to stand together.
Well, Tiffany Muller, thank you for what you do and for what End Citizens United is doing to end the second Gilded Age in this country.
That's
at least
right.
the second one. There may have been others, at least the two that we know of. You've been great. Very thorough discussion.
Mark and Walt, thank you so much for having me on. It's been great.
Thanks for being with us. Great discussion.
Well, that is a wrap for this week's episode. Our thanks to Tiffany Muller for joining us for a great conversation. Please remember to subscribe to our YouTube channel, which you can find at our website, arepublicpodcast.com.
And if the Republic is still standing in a week, who knows whether it will be or not, Jeff and I will rejoin you all next week.
Thank you for your attention to this matter.
A Republic, if you can keep it, is a presentation of Michigan citizens for a better tomorrow.